Welcome everybody to this UWM Access program, co-sponsored by Boswell Book Company. I'm Daniel Golden, the proprietor. It is day 4,129 of us being in business, most of which were in real bookstore, but virtual's okay too. Feel like I've been working with folks on this program for 6 months, I think. So book came out in February, Everywhere You Don't Belong. Gabriel was originally scheduled to come to Milwaukee in March, and I believe he did actually a school event. The book has won wide acclaim, was an Indie Next pick, and is being taught in many classrooms, including those of one of our facilitators. So let me introduce to you Shawna Lucas, who is a UWM Access Facilitator, an activist, and an educator. She teaches at Glen Hills Middle School, and I believe she has taught the book in her classroom. And she is, our other facilitator is Nassif Rogers, who up until I think this week was the principal of Glen Hills Middle School. Might have gotten my date wrong, but after that, he will be the Director of Equity for the Wauwatosa School District. So what an honor to have you three. I'm going to mute myself now. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Daniel, for all of the hard work behind the scenes, the emailing, the connecting, the communicating, the collaborating. You are just a joy to work with, and we are forever in your debt for many, many reasons. So thank you so much, Daniel.
Yes, indeed. I'm really happy to be a part of this, and I'm happy that so many people were interested in attending. Thank everyone for being here. Thank you for this gem of a book that was just so delightful, and the feedback I got from my students about this book was just fantastic, and I'm looking forward to trying to figure out how to use it when the school starts again. I know that there are many ways that that can be done, so thank you. I think we start off, Nassif, you and I we have a few questions, or is it a reading first?
We can leave it up to Gabe. We're pretty flexible. We're not married to a structure or process. And so, Gabe, if you would like to start us off with a selection that you'd like to read, and then we can start with questions, or we can start with questions and then go into a reading. Up to you, sir.
Yeah, well, I guess first of all, I'm really happy to, I guess, be in my living room, but like be on this call with you. I was looking forward to my trip to Milwaukee, and it's been really heartening to hear that my book has like resonated, especially with young people there, right? Because I think that I wrote this book with readers like Claude in mind.
Absolutely.
Right? So that was my like desired audience, I guess, right? If we think about who we're writing for. So I was writing for kids like Claude, and so that's, you can't really top that. Right here. And then Shawna and Nassif, thanks for being here and doing this. Daniel, thanks for grinding and sticking with this for months and months. I don't know if I'd have the stamina to keep it up. And thank you all for coming. So how about I'll just read something like really short. I'm just gonna read the final chapter of the book. Now, for everybody at home, this isn't like a spoiler or anything like that. There's no big twist on the final page. It's not that kind of book. But I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So this is gonna be short, and then we'll just jump into it. How's that sound?
Fantastic.
All right, great. So, Everywhere You Don't Belong. It's about a young man from the south side of Chicago, the neighborhood where I grew up, South Shore, and it follows his life from when he's, a toddler up until he's 18, leaves Chicago, goes to college, and the whole concept of this, of this book, revolves around young Black men like trying to figure out where they belong in America, right? And I think that's not just young Black men, right? Like it's people that identify them in any ways, right? And so I think the aspects of it are universal. But this is the final chapter, where we belong. Sometimes when it's morning and we're both tired, I stare across the table and see Janice again in the back seat. I see her hair rattling in the wind. I feel my hand on her knee, held there for hours and miles. I see her on the beach, picking up empty shells. I hear her kicking sand. I smell salt on her shoulders. I turn to her whenever the future frightens me, the present frightens me, the past ambushes my peace, and sleep doesn't come. When the sun rises and Janice looks right at me, I see them all in her eyes. Grandma and Paul, happy, laughing, waving, safe. Everyone in South Shore, safe and happy. They're okay without us. They forgive us for leaving. We're okay too. Yes, right where we belong.
Thank you for that. Shawna, would you like to take the honors of the first question?
Right. So I think the first question that I had in mind had something to do with what you just read and what you said about writing for Black people and all people who feel that they are finding the place that they belong. And I also appreciated working with students who have varying reading abilities. I really appreciate how you were able to weave such richness in the vignettes or in the montages in the story. And I'm thinking particularly about the beginning and the opening chapters, because those are the kind of things that keep my kids, keeps their attention. You know what I mean? And so I loved it right away. I knew that this would be something that the kids would love. And I'm thinking about particularly the chapter with his parents and the opening scene with Claude's father. You probably get asked about this scene a lot. I want to know if the stories came first, or did the characters inform the stories as you were writing these beautiful montages?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And for me, in this book, and in I guess like everything I write, the characters carry everything, right? And so this novel started as like just a bunch of short stories I was writing, like in college and grad school, right? Just around these characters that I really loved. So it probably wouldn't be too surprising to know that like I just started with Claude, Grandma, and Paul. Like those were the characters. I think even Claude and Grandma were the first ones. And I just fell in love, like something about them just stuck with me, and I kind of fell in love with them. And the fun part about writing, at least for me, the fun part about, writing just stories involving characters you really love and like kind of can't get out of your head, is that you can just set them on the page and have them do whatever you think that they would do, right? And if you get really in tune with them. So for example, like Claude's dad, right, like isn't in the book for very much, right? Like he's just in there for a couple chapters. But everything he does, right, is like exactly how like I'd imagine that person acting, right, in my head. Like when he's beating up this man who calls him Booker T. Washington, as an insult, right? When he runs into the lake when Jordan announces he's coming out of retirement, right? Like that's the dude that I can picture in my head just behaving like that.
Seems very Chicago too.
Yeah, so like I imagine him as just like this ultra Chicago person, right? Like, and I guess the like kind of the ultra Chicago hype, I guess, if I have to put it like some way. Right? And the rest of it, like when Grandma and Paul are fighting with their neighbors about what's the actual home of basketball, like Chicago or New York. You know, those are arguments that I've had in my life, right? I think that most Chicago basketball fans, like, have had those arguments.
Yeah, because we are
Cages and Courts was new for me, for sure. That Cages and Courts, I love that.
Yeah. Well, that, I mean, in that, so a lot of the like feeling of South Shore in the book, right? Like the fog in the early chapters, or like the difference between basketball and cages and basketball like in open air areas, like those are just things I can remember thinking from a young age, right? Like why is there this one weird like basketball cage? I don't see this anywhere else in the city. And then you see like New York, they're everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And since we're talking about characters, I want to jump to one of my later questions, but it fits in perfectly right now. I do want to talk about, as a collection and then also individually, Grandma, Mom, Janice, and Simone. They all played very critical roles in Claude's development at different junctures in his life. And, you know, in general, why was it important for you to have these very strong and all these very different Black women serve as anchors or points of conflict for Claude? What was sort of your thinking behind that, and what did you want to illuminate more with these 4 Black women in relation to Claude?
Yeah, like I think that, well, so in terms of like Grandma, right? Like just Grandma as a character is loosely based off of like my grandma, right? Like the book is dedicated to her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like she's just this strong, funny, like tough woman. But then like I guess all of the female characters in the book, of course there were moments where like I was thinking of them as like thinking of them as women, right? Like writing them as women, but in most of like, well, I'm mainly just thinking like in terms of Claude and Janice's relationship, right? Like that's just young love, like puppy love, these people that are enamored with each other. But I think that like what's important to, for all writers, like when you're writing women characters, right, is to just write them as people, right? Like not thinking that they have to be a certain way, or like act a certain way. And I think that's the same if you're like writing about, I don't know, like anybody, right? Like if you're a white person writing about Black people, like you're just writing people, right? Like, so I think they all just happen to kind of be like strong and tough, right? Like, and maybe in the crafting of that, that's just because like Claude is such kind of this like bumbling, like soft, you know, unexceptional kid that it's nice on the page to strike a balance with that. And so I guess that's as far as I can answer that question.
Sure.
Well, I think just to get into Janice a little more, you know, I was thinking about her character a lot, and she is, you know, one of my favorite characters. I would say top 3 for sure. But you two probably, I think the CP like her too. We talked about this, right? In the book, I highlighted this passage that Claude speaks about Janice, and he says, you know, she was in denial, pretending. She kept smiling, laughing at nothing, touching my arms, legs, shoulders, and head. I smiled back, laughed with her, sank into her denial, enjoyed myself. it just seems to me that you're in touch with you know, how women, and particularly Black women, have to be tough, but also vulnerable in a lot of ways that that they only allow certain people to see. And I'm just wondering how, if you were informed by other characters in your life, or is it just something you feel like you understand about writing about, you know, maybe Black women or just women in general?
Well, I guess that would come from some like life experience, right? And then maybe let's say I started writing this book, you know, 8 years ago or something, like, you know, it's like 5 years ago. And I feel like kind of the national discussion about how maybe like Black women, these expectations on Black women, like how they can be impossible to meet, right? Like, and are unnecessary, right? I think that like it's the expectations and responsibilities we put on Black women, like is supposed to somehow like take away from work that as men we should be doing.
Right.
Like what I saw, and this is the last time I'll mention Twitter here, I promise. But like I saw like a tweet that I think speaks really like closely to what you said, Shawna, was that someone like said that Kanye West really needs a Black woman in his life, right? Mm-hmm. Is it like a Black woman is supposed to come in and kind of save Kanye West, and that's like has stuck with me like ever since reading that. And so in terms like how that plays out in the book too, like I love Janice, right? Like as a person, and even as I was like pretty soon into writing this book, like into writing her character, like I stopped thinking of her as a love interest for Claude, right? Like I stopped like thinking of that story solely as a love story. Like, you know, they're just really close, right? They're really close friends, and they're allowed to be like vulnerable with each other. And there's that small chapter like after the riot scene where it's just Grandma and Janice like sitting on the porch, and Claude is eavesdropping on their conversation. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was like important for me to put in the book, because this book is written from a male's perspective, right? Like by a man. And so I thought it was important to just have a scene where these two really strong women are like being like vulnerable and like are like supporting each other, right? Like are building each other up. So yeah, I guess that's how I feel about it. And I love Janice too, still do. I think she's amazing.
Yeah, definitely one of my favorites. And like as you were speaking about their love, and it became less about a romantic love and just more about them, I think it was just more about just universal love that they had for each other and one another's humanity. And that they could be themselves with each other in spaces and places and everywhere else they didn't belong, right? Yeah. And to that point, and keeping the theme with Black women, I want to pivot us to Toni Morrison. And I can tell by your smile how you feel about her. But just kind of what's been your relationship to Toni Morrison and her work, and what has she meant to you as an aspiring writer, as a writer, and you know, and how does she inform not just your craft and your art, but also your Blackness?
Yeah, well, I think that she informs all of our Blackness. I think, or everyone's just humanity, right? Like I think that, you know, but she transcended, right? Like race in a big way. But I think that, like, where's a good place to start? So like Sula, I think like Sula is my favorite Toni Morrison book. I think like by far, right? I really like, and then you can probably tell, right, by reading like just really focused on this friendship, right? Like it's this whole kind of life story of people, and it's just so beautiful. And I think that the ending of Sula too, where we get this image of her kind of twirling into dust, like in the wind. So if anyone out there, if you haven't read Sula, you like kind of have to do it. It reads really quick. But I think Toni Morrison influenced my craft. Well, and it's hard to say just my craft, because I think like Toni Morrison's footprint on all literature dealing with the Black experience is so large that you can't avoid it. Right? Like if everyone, whether you like it or not, is just writing in her shadow, rightfully so. And I think we're lucky to have her as an example, right? Like, and maybe I'll just like finish by saying that like when people talk about Toni Morrison, or when I hear just kind of her mentioned in the ether, we don't spend much time like talking about her like crafts, her like excellent, I was gonna say craftsmanship, and then like craftwomanship sounds like awkward, but her just style and power and grace as a writer, right, is something that like, I don't know, she could be writing about or she could have written a book about, I don't know, like Portuguese whalers in the Azores or something, and you like would imagine that it would be one of the best books ever written. Like that's just the writer that she was, and I think we're lucky that she decided to dump her craft and show us all the way in like writing about Black life, right?
Mm-hmm. She made us matter.
Yeah, and intentionally.
Yeah.
Okay. I could talk Toni Morrison. I think that ending evoked for me Milkman jumping at the end of Song of Solomon. So I don't know. It was a little exciting for me, but it's okay. but I want to get into another character that I think everybody probably loved, which is Paul.
Yes, Paul.
So when I think about Paul, I was really just so pleased by how this idea of queer love being just accepted as the norm and as just the fact of Claude's life and Grandma's life. And also Teeth will bring him into this too. And I think that I wonder if Paul is a character that exists or has existed in your world, or is his character more of an acknowledgement of the audience and how you want them to be informed about a certain experience, either Black or queer, in America?
Yeah, I think that like I haven't known someone exactly like Paul, right? But like I think we all like kind of have, if that makes sense, right? Like someone that like isn't totally, and especially of that generation, I think too, right? Like that doesn't feel comfortable like being themselves like outside of the house, like out on the street, right? Like because even Paul being like the confident, like funny, just natural person that he is, like we only see him, you know, really expressing himself like in the house, or when he is like kind of meeting his boyfriend, like a little undercover, right? Like they go in like the back room of this bar, right, to meet each other. And so the importance of showing that character, I guess, is just to acknowledge that, like, again, those are stories that matter, right? And I think that are a valuable part of the Black experience, right, in America. Because like one thread that runs through this book is like, how does a Black man handle the like masculinity that is like forced upon him on site, like this idea of I don't know, like how society portrays Black people, right, like others, and then how individuals respond and react to that. But when I was writing, it's not like everything Paul did, I was thinking in those terms, right? Like this person is doing this. At some moment, just like all the other characters, I just let Paul be a person, right? Like the love that he shows Claude, like this relationship he has with Teeth, is like really important for Claude to see. And it doesn't matter if it's if it's a same-sex relationship, right? Like it's just two people that really love each other, and one of them experiences was a horrible tragedy that like pulls them apart. And I think that was important for Claude to like see and grow from. Right? And so at a certain level, Paul is just Paul, right? And I think that's important too.
Very important, especially for younger students to think about. So I appreciated that character.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the normalization of these different characters, knowing externally how they present to us as Black or as queer or as women, Black women, and how you write about them, you normalize them in their experiences. And thinking about Paul and his relationship to Grandma, already with Claude's name being Claude McKay, it put me in a mind frame of the Harlem Renaissance. Yeah. And so in thinking about Paul and Grandma, they sort of reminded me of Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, mm-hmm. and sort of their relationship. So, and it's strange, I don't know why, but that was really present for me. And so, was that intentional on your part? Did you draw some source of inspiration between the relationship and the tense frenemy relationship that Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes had, that shifted from platonic to romantic to platonic to hating each other, then the love triangles that they were involved in, and how did that inform Paul and Grandma?
So it wasn't a direct influence, okay. Right? But like I did view it as like this weird like creative partnership that has totally spun off the rails, right? And now they're just kind of stuck together in this house in Chicago and raising this child, and then later like Janice. But in terms of like the Harlem Renaissance connection to the book and then like my work, Claude McKay, I was, especially in high school and college, like I thought the Harlem Renaissance was just the coolest thing that has happened in history, right? Like the work that came out of it, the people, like, I don't know, and just this like, this combination of like viewpoints within the Black community, right? Like this idea of, okay, how do we, so you have like art for art's sake, right? And then you have like kind of all art as political art, right? And like how to balance that. And it's this, I don't know, it's a conversation we're still having, which I think is like really fascinating and kind of shows the importance of those people that like addressed it head on in that really cool sphere. And I mean, I guess you wouldn't, would Paul Robeson be considered part of the Harlem Renaissance?
My initial blush at that is yes. I would consider him as part of the Harlem Renaissance. That's how I was introduced to him.
Yeah.
Harlem Renaissance writing and research in college.
Yeah. Well, I guess because he was such an international figure.
Yeah.
It was like it's hard to like locate him in Harlem in that time. I guess he's like from.
He did transcend time periods. That's true.
Like everybody.
Right.
But like Paul, this is the first book I wrote. I was a huge Paul Robeson nut in college. Paul is like named after Paul Robeson, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, that connection to, you know, how I work all the time is, yeah, is there, still is.
Yeah, I was really pleased to see that, and how you just wrote about these characters and their stories. That was something that was remarkable about the Harlem Renaissance, was that it shattered early on at the time that idea of a single narrative about the experience of Black people during that particular time. And Hurston and Hughes in particular were just enamored with the idea of ordinary Black folks and also Black folklore. And you see both of those elements at play in your novel, especially with Paul and some of his stories and the lessons he tries to impart upon Claude and Grandma too, her stern civil rights, self-righteous lessons too. You see elements of that in those as well.
Yeah, and I mean, even in like the way Grandma kind of puts this pressure on Claude to be exceptional, right? Like, I think that when, like, whenever anybody puts that kind of pressure on a young Black person, I think it's directly connected to like talented 10th ideology.
Yes.
Like that you have to be responsible for uplifting like everybody else, right? When like, I don't know, Claude just wants to be a kid, right? And I think that like telling, and you can imagine, I guess, you know, 100 years ago, right? Like, you can imagine 100 years ago when we think of the Harlem Renaissance as this like towering moment. Like, what about the kid that was just kind of in his classroom, right? Like, just trying to I don't know, talk to the girl he likes, right? Like, and so I think like that has always been an interesting perspective. Right?
Yeah, just thinking about that perspective and thinking about the little ways you evoke the presence of the Harlem Renaissance in the book with Claude McKay, and there's a discussion about Langston Hughes in the chapter Sociology 1. And you know, I recently realized that some of the Harlem Renaissance figures like Langston Hughes who grew up in the Midwest, who grew up in I think Illinois. He lived for a while. He graduated from high school in Ohio, Missouri, lived in Kansas, I believe. And then he's this huge figure of the Harlem Renaissance, Josephine Baker, who was born in St. Louis and grew up in St. Louis. And you think about that Midwestern influence of the Harlem Renaissance, and I wonder if that is something that you were aware of and how it may have formed why you wanted to put those elements in the book at all.
Well, I mean, I certainly was aware of it. Like, I think if I'm not mistaken, like Langston Hughes spent not an insignificant amount of time like in Chicago. Right?
Yeah, he did.
And like on the south side of Chicago. And then, I mean, and I guess that this was like an Easter egg I kind of put in for just like Black history nuts or something. But like Jonah's parents, in one of the early chapters, like they work for the Chicago Defender.
Yes.
Which is one of the like most important like Black newspapers in history, right? And it's
to this day.
To this day, right? And so I guess like Claude, when I was in high school, like I wrote for my high school newspaper. And I like I went to Missouri to like study journalism, right? Before like I transferred and left. And I was always aware of the legacy and importance of Black storytelling, right? Like mainly because like I knew about the Chicago Defender, right? And I was like, like this is an honorable profession to have, but then I just realized I liked making up stuff more than.
You have a follow-up question, Shawna, or you want me to pivot us to a new?
No, I mean, I think that you, with that Midwestern thing, you know, there were so many nuggets about Midwestern culture that I really loved, and I think is a way that I can see so many ways teachers can think about how to do a lot of, you know, pre-work around the cultural things that you put into the book. So I just wanted to ask that question, and I loved it.
Yeah, well, I'm a total like history nut. Like I just read history for fun, and I've always kind of been that way. Like it was like the only class that like besides journalism that actually like stuck with me.
Right.
Like could really grab my attention. So I think maybe a cool activity would just be make the students try and answer or find every historical, you know, like Easter egg in the book and line them up.
That will be a great activity.
I like that.
Project, yeah. Still on this point, I loved a lot of the Chicago nuggets that were in there too, and just how you just situated Chicago and celebrated Chicago, but also at the same time use Chicago as a mirror for the rest of society, either through the discussions or the Easter egg tidbits on history, through some of the cultural references, through basketball as being the mecca for basketball, and a few hip hop references too. I feel like were in there as well. And to localize the conversation a little bit more, you know, when folks do write about or speak about Chicago, especially at the national level, you hear stories about Wrigleyville and Bridgeport, Sox versus Cubs. You hear stories about Hyde Park and Pilsen and Logan Square, those neighborhoods. But I loved the fact that you situated the story in South Shore. And I have a lot of family in South Shore and spent quite a bit of time there as well. 81st and Bennett.
Oh.
Yep. and so can you talk a little bit more about, other than the obvious reason as to why you chose South Shore, but just what South Shore means to you in that particular region of Chicago?
Yeah, well, I mean, it means, you know, it means everything to me, I guess, right? Like, it's weird. Like I haven't lived there in 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Like I left for grad school and then now live in Buffalo, but like I've like never left, you know? And I think that for me, like when I was writing this book, when I started writing it, and I understood like what I was doing even in college, right? Like, cause in college I was reading a lot of Stuart Dybek, right? And like, and I fell in love with Stuart Dybek, right? And like just these stories about like Polish kids and back of the yards and like Bridgeport just getting into no good and like being in. But one thing that I thought was missing in like the Dybek stories, well, first was like there's not many like Black people that get a lot of screen time in like Stuart Dybek stories, but also like I wanted stories like that about like my neighborhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and when I was writing, like there were these two things like happening on the south side of Chicago, but then like maybe even South Shore in particular, right?
Mm-hmm.
First, you had the First Lady of the United States, right? Like grew up or spent most of her childhood on Euclid Avenue.
Yes,
right?
all praise to Michelle Obama.
Yeah, like just south of where I grew up, and so there was like this, I don't know, like this this towering example of Black exceptionalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like someone that like can. Even if, you know, like she didn't come from totally dire straits, but like even still like rose above her station and like became one of the most powerful women in the world, right? Like still is. And then on the other side of the spectrum, this was when, and I guess it's sad in this current context, but this is when like violence in South Shore was spiking, like really, like tragically, right? Like, there were just shootings and murders every day. And so like on the other side of the Black experience, like kind of just wrapped in South Shore was this like anger and frustration and violence, right? With mainly young people, like kids, right? It's like kids that are kind of just expressing some frustration and anger in the world, like in this really violent way. And so, like I wanted to represent everything that was happening like in the middle in South Shore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just going about their days, like going about their lives. Like I would take the number 15 bus to school. Like I take the number like 14 downtown. Like if I have to like go down there, and you know, there was just like people riding the bus,
Right.
like and it seemed like the national news wasn't really talking about those people. And I mean, even so, this was a long time. I guess not that long, but you know, like 8 years ago. And it's sad to see what's happening like in that area of Chicago still.
Mm-hmm.
Was it last night or 2 nights ago when there was the 14 people shot in Auburn Gresham, right, which is right next to South Shore, right? It's on 79th, I think like 79th and Cottage or something.
Yep.
And I was just like, before I hopped on this, I was talking to my mom. My parents still live down there.
Okay.
And that has been a constant with most phone calls with my mother, right? It's like, you know, it's still bad here, and you can just hear like the exhaustion in her voice, right? Like, and I think the sadness and tragedy of that kind of violence is, I don't know, is lost when it reaches the national level, right? It's like,
It is.
yeah. And so I think that, like in the book, like representing those people like as people, and those like murders as tragedies, like individual tragedies, neighborhood tragedies, I think is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's see if you think we should see if the people want to ask a question. What do you think?
Sure. We can pivot to the people.
Pivot to the people.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions that have been sent to us electronically that we can start with, and folks out there in the Zoom verse, if you can start placing your questions in the chat box, or raise your hand for your turn to be called, we can start rolling through some of those questions. And also, thanks to the 100 visitors that we've had come through and just maintain close to 90 people so far during the conversation. Not just in Milwaukee, but we got folks in Chicago, folks in the DC, Virginia area, folks in California. So thank you all so much for joining us with this conversation tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
First question is from Benjamin Schneider, who is a UW Milwaukee professor. He says, "Hi, Gabe, love your novel, and I'm planning on teaching it this fall in my honors seminar at UW Milwaukee. When Claude goes to college, he has a chance to reinvent, but it's not easy to just be someone new. I was hoping you could say a little bit about how you see the relationship between place and identity and growing up."
Yeah, well, I guess thanks for the question, Benjamin, and I hope your students get something out of it, I guess. I guess like, because that part of the book is maybe more closely modeled off of my own experience in college than like the first half of the book, you know, like it's more exciting than my real life was. But like the emotions in the second half of the book were things I felt, right? When I went from an urban environment, like in the middle of Missouri, not really like having any like close friends, you know, like I knew some people from Chicago that were down there and knew them. And I think that part of the book in particular is like universal, right? Especially for kids that grow up in cities and go to state schools, right? Like kind of like big state schools, usually in the middle of nowhere. And I still don't think I've like processed a lot of that experience. Right, like the first time like that I saw like Confederate flags, right, like and just how jarring that was to me. But then, like most importantly, I think it's really hard for any student of color or any kind of like person that's marginalized in society to like feel comfortable in these institutions because there's so much pressure, like the amount of division like in our society at large, I think is magnified in or in like universities and in colleges, right? Like, so you can really be in a classroom where you're the only Black person and you end up like having to be like the Black person that these people know, right? I think that pressure is really alienating for kids that are just trying to get an education somewhere. And I hope that colleges like take that alienation really seriously and just understand it's this thing that's affecting students.
Thank you for answering that. And thank you, Benjamin, for your question.
Yeah, thanks, Benjamin.
Shawna, I have a person who has raised their hand. So we'll go to her question and then you want to take the next question that was sent to us via email?
Sure. Are you talking about, did you see Ananda's?
Yeah, that's what
okay. All right, good. Okay. Yep, I'll take the other one we had written, sure.
Okay. All right. So Ananda Deacon, my favorite person in the whole world. One of my former students and future president of the United States.
All right.
What is your question and how are you?
Well, now I got to make it a good question.
Oh, hey, there she is.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, for taking the time to speak with us tonight. I really enjoyed your book. It was very readable. Sometimes it's hard to get through books that aren't as, I don't know, readable as yours. And so my question, I thought your dialogue was really unique. I haven't read a book that did dialogue like that before. Especially because it felt like the characters sometimes weren't talking to each other, they were talking to themselves out loud. And some of it read like prose more than like a book. And so I was wondering what the inspirations behind the way the characters talk to each other was.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. And I can't wait to vote for you when you run for president.
Yes.
And so I guess like for me, dialogue is really important, right, in everything that I write. And I think that, like my style comes from like my love for like plays, right, and like even like screenplays, right? Like I like when people like talk really fast and just move the story along like that. And I take a lot of time like crafting dialogue. And as far as sometimes it feels like people are talking to themselves instead of the other person, it's like some like conversations are like that in real life, right? Like when, like I know there have been times where I've been just sitting talking with a friend and it's like we're just saying the things that are coming into our mind, like about some general topic and not really like listening to each other. And I think like exploiting those weird quirks in everyday conversation can lead to, I don't know, like some poetry, some humor. So that's, I guess that's as much as I can say like about the crafting of it.
All right. Thanks, Ananda. So as a teacher, this is a question from Andrew Lazari of Milwaukee Public Schools. He says, as a teacher, I kept thinking as I was reading how easy it would be for a young man like Claude and a young woman like Janice to slip through the cracks of the educational system and society as a whole. This is true for many of the students I serve as well. Was this an intentional theme or me just connecting the book to what I see in schools?
No, I mean, I think that, well, first, like, thanks for the question and good luck with this upcoming school year. I think that, like, to a certain extent, Claude and Janice, right, like, do slip through the cracks, right? Like, they are kind of ignored, right, to a certain extent. And I feel like a majority of, like, most students kind of feel that way, right? Like, if you're just kind of one of, well, like, how big are our classrooms now, right? Like, if you're one of 40 kids in a classroom, like, of course, a lot of kids can just go unnoticed. Some of them intentionally, some that really, like, need kind of attention and affection are just kind of missed in the shuffle. And it doesn't mean that they're bad kids or, like, not smart, right, or anything like that. But I think that like, everybody should care more about those kids, right? Like, well, we should care about every child, right? And, well, again, one of the reasons I was drawn to Claude as a character is because he is someone that someone that society doesn't really put much attention towards, right? Through the book, I hope that we learn that people like Claude, even if they're not, like, exceptionally bright or, like, good at basketball, even, like, horrible at basketball, right? Or, like, really provide anything that is, like, worth something, right? In, like, the monetary sense. Like, Claude, I think, is an amazing person, and we should have, like, more Claudes in the world. We do.
I agree. We should have more Claudes. You have a follow-up question, Shawna?
Well, it just looks like Michelle Street, hi Michelle, wants to know what Gabe's reading right now.
What am I reading right now? I'm reading, like, 5 different books. I have total, like, quarantine attention span brain.
I hear you.
Yeah. But let's see, the last book that I read start to finish that I really loved was this biography of Vincent Guerrero, the first Black Mexican president, right? And who was president of Mexico in the 1820s, like, soon after the, like, first revolution.
Oh, wow.
And it's, like, fascinating stuff, right? And I think that I was reading it, I read it, like, 3 weeks ago, and just, like, how this coalition of indigenous and Afro-Mexicans like, kind of came together and ousted the Spaniards, or, you know, most of the dominating Spanish class. Was, you know, inspiring for the moment. It's good, show a unity. I'm reading, like, a lot of screenplays now. I'm trying to write more like, screenplays. And again, like, dialogue, right? Like, I just can't really get away from it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
I have a question from an audience member, Cheryl, and she is asking, did you envision a future for Janice and Claude after the book? And do we get a spinoff series?
Yeah. I've been asked that question a lot, and I haven't thought about them, right? Like, I haven't really thought about what they're doing. I just know that they're happy, right? Like, and that's why I like reading that final page, right? Because I think that's the most important part of the book, right? It's just that these two people end up just happy. Like, I'm not gonna, for people that haven't read the book, I'm not gonna tell everything that happened. But, like, I don't even care if they're still romantically involved, right? Like, I don't care that, I don't care where they're living, right? I just like the idea of them being close and them being happy. So I think no spin-off, at least for them.
Well, I in my Twitter stalking of you, I know that you are watching I May Destroy You, HBO series.
Yeah.
So HBO comes to you and says, hey, can you pitch us a draft copy of a spinoff show for Janice and Claude? What would your answer be?
It would be Keep Walking, or For How Much, I guess. No, I mean, I think that, I don't think I would actually want to do that. But I think that there are characters in the book that I'd be interested in, writing more of if it felt natural. Like Paul and Grandma, right? Seems pretty interesting, like their life before Chicago.
Yeah, I would love to see that story.
I'd read that.
Yeah, like I think that'd be kind of cool.
May not be a YA novel though.
Yeah. Yeah, like
Or it could be.
I think that'd be pretty niche or something. But like again, I just that book is about Claude and Janice, right? And it's like that's their like story, and they went through so much at such a young age, right? And just the idea that they can kind of now venture off into adulthood with some stability, no matter what ups and downs come, like it's, to me, it's just nice that they made it to the other side.
Mm-hmm. Follow-up question from Michelle Street. Hi, Michelle. What playwrights would you recommend?
August Wilson, I think. Like, if you're interested in like playwriting, just read August Wilson's Century series. Right? Like he talks about the Black experience for every decade of the 19th century. And just one winter break in grad school, I just spent a week reading all of them. And I don't know, maybe Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man has influenced me more, but I think that like August Wilson's plays kind of did the most for me. Susan Laurie Parks, too, like anything that she's written. And then like Annie Baker, who's a playwright from Western Massachusetts, where I went to grad school. Again, like everything she writes is amazing. And I feel like I've found that in common with playwrights. Like if they're really good, everything they write is amazing. Like like they don't miss with plays. Like with novelists and like short story writers and even like poets, you can get some misses in it. But so I don't know what it is about playwrights. It's just when they're good, they can't miss. They can't go wrong.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Ralph Ellison too. Kelly Saunders, who's on here. Well, I also want to give a quick shout out to who's just very instrumental in spreading the word about you and your book, and
thank you.
Getting our little community enamored with it. So kudos to Kelly for that.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. From Diana Jones, she is asking, I'm wondering if you can touch on the Red Belters and the scene with the father-daughter at the hotel.
Touch with the Red Belters in the scene. Oh, so like the ending of the book?
Yeah, without divulging too many details. Yeah, I guess maybe we can break the question up into two parts. And please, Diana, please direct us if we're off about this.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the Red Belters as a character group in the book and their significance?
Oh, yeah. Okay. She meant it.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Red Belters, let's see. Well, like I guess I'll start with the name, right? Because the Red Belters aren't a real gang in Chicago, right? But like when I wanted to be a journalist, like I would do a lot of studying of like crime statistics in Chicago. Like again, this was when the rate was spiking, I guess, as it's spiking now, right? Like in the city, and just trying to map things out and see where everything is. And on a map of Chicago, like if you look at a crime database, like all murders are like marked with red dots on the crime base. And like if you look at the city, there is this like section just across the middle. Like you go from like Inglewood, like South Shore, Auburn Gresham, like Inglewood, like and then up out west. And it looks like the city is like wearing this red belt, right? Like the city has like this red belt across its midriff. But I wanted like this gang to have some aspects of kind of like the Chicago gangs in like the 60s and 70s, right? Like the Rangers, the Peastone Rangers. Like these gangs that were kind of like doing stuff in the community too, right? Like had this had somewhat lofty aspirations for their
social justice purpose.
Right. And this idea of just kind of like protecting the neighborhood, like in some ways, and it's like it's complicated, right? And so I wanted the Red Belters to be this really complicated force, and like some of the stuff that Big Columbus says, you know, is stuff that like I heard at some like, you know, protests here in like Buffalo, right? Like from like leaders in the neighborhood. I think that like how he uses his position of power was really interesting to me. Right? And, in earlier versions, and this I guess will segue into the second part, but in earlier versions of the book, like the Red Belters play a massive part in the second half of the book, right? Like it's just kind of all Big Columbus, Claude, and the Red Belters. And there was less Janice in the second half. And that was just because I was watching a lot of like The Wire and The Sopranos, I think, like, when I was like writing it. And at some point my agent was like, okay, you're losing your mind. Like, we have to focus this on the characters that really matter, right? Like Claude and Janice. But like the Red Belters to me are really interesting. And Big Columbus, like has a connection to Roz and Invisible Man, right? Like for people that are familiar, right? Like Roz the Exalted. And so I guess the couple at the end of the book, Juna and her father, I mean, I love them as characters, and I think that like this being a book about belonging, right? Like finding your place in America, the immigrant perspective, I also thought was important, right? Like how like other people are kind of treated too, besides just Black people. And if you noticed, towards the end of the book, there's a scene where they're just like explaining cricket, like to Clark.
That's one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, I thought I was gonna have to cut that because
Glad you didn't.
like in grad school, I got really into cricket. Like I just woke up like at 4 o'clock one morning and like had just finished all of my coursework, and was just the TV was on, and so since then I've been a big like cricket fan, and so that's another thing I just slid underneath the watchful eye of my editor.
So it looks like I found another question from someone, and you talked about the books that you're reading now, and I think about books that I read when I was young. I remember being in 8th grade and reading Alex Haley's The Autobiography of Malcolm X, and if you talk to any other, you know, person of color who read that when they were in middle school, which is probably way too young to read that, it just made me very angry, but it was very formative for me. I wonder if there are some other books that you read when you were younger. Were you a history book guy when you were in high school, or did you engage in other types of texts?
I was still a history book guy. I mean, I read, like in high school, I read a lot of James Baldwin, particularly his nonfiction, right? I thought was, I don't know, like changed my, or like inform my perspective on a lot of things, however many years later. But I was fortunate enough to have a really brilliant and kind older sister who at the time was in college and studying like kind of African liberation movements. So like when I was in middle school, I could just walk into her room when she was away in college and like just steal her books about like Patrice Lumumba. You know, like I remember trying to read like A Long Walk to Freedom and like doing it, but that's like, man, this book is really long. Like, so I think that like, you know, and I've actually in recent months, I've gone back to reading more like African colonial histories. But that was kind of the first stuff I read about the Black experience, like oddly enough, like the African diasporic experience. And yeah, so I don't know, my brother used to mess with, like when he was playing with me, would just call me like a Black nationalist when I was like 14 years old. So my reading habits were a little strange, I think.
We have another participant question from Gianna, a good friend. So she is asking, have you watched Lena Waithe's The Chi, and how does her storytelling, specifically just depicting people in their lives on the South Side, mirror what you did in your book, and how is this different from what was available or lacking for your consumption when you were younger?
Yeah, so I think that like The Chi came out for an awkward period, just like for me, I think, right? Because like I was writing this book about Southside of Chicago, so I watched like a few episodes early on, but then didn't want like her excellent storytelling to influence the type of stories, right? Like I was trying to tell.
Sure.
And but I think like what Lena Waithe is doing with that show, and I guess just in general with her writing, is similar to what I'm trying to do, right? It's like just making these stories accessible, right, to like a certain degree, right? Like just humanizing everything. I think there's a lot of like empathy in her writing, in The Chi, and I think intentionally she hasn't influenced me that much, but like I think that if The Chi was on when I was in like high school, like middle school, if The Chi had come out before I started writing this book, I'm not sure I would have written it the way that it is, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? Because I felt like I was writing something that was like adding something that wasn't there. I guess like a book is different than a TV show. But we just didn't have anything like that.
No.
About Chicago, right? And, so I mean, she did it, and she did it in like a big, cool way, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And so did you.
Oh.
And so did you.
All right, thanks.
Another question from Ellen, and she's asking, is there significance of the orange dot over the face of the person on the cover?
Yeah, so I didn't have much say in like how, you know, they just showed me a cover and I was like, yeah, I like this. So I didn't design it or anything like that. I think the orange dot is supposed to just signify like kind of the facelessness of someone like Claude, like moving through society, right? So we'll see. They're giving the cover a makeover for the paperback that comes out in a couple months. So that hasn't dropped yet, but it is a little bit different. I like that too.
Yeah. Did you have more creative control over the makeover?
No, I just do what I'm told, right? I'm a pushover. But I like, you know, I love the covers that Algonquin puts together, right? So I never felt the need to push back on anything.
Yeah. Shawna, what more do you have?
I don't see any more. The only thing I really want to know is who that baby is on your hoodie.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
This is Benny the Butcher. I don't know if he's one of like Griselda Buffalo rappers. They just signed with Rock Nation. The CEO like sells all these hoodies. So I'm not a hype beast, but I do have like every Buffalo-centric hoodie that these people sell.
Nice. We need to represent Milwaukee like that. I'll go and find
Yeah, like
local artist swag to wear like that.
no, Buffalo, they go hard on the local swag.
I'm going to check out Buffalo hip hop.
I'm gonna try it now. I think you just got them some new followers tonight. So.
Oh yeah, I mean they just signed with Rock Nation, like for like a management thing. I mean, I wouldn't recommend the music for, even though young people listen to whatever they want. I don't think it sets a good example for the youth, whatever that might be.
Oh no, we can't play this in the background during our book clubs of Everywhere You Don't Belong.
Yeah, no.
Soundtrack.
Yeah, no. I think that. Well, I don't know how you guys do it, but I would maybe.
We don't do it like that.
Well, Shawna and I wanted to be invited back, so we didn't want to be too. Let's see. Well, that's all I have. Anything else you have, Shawna?
No, that's it. This is wonderful.
And in the words of Grandma, that's enough culture for one day.
Well, thanks so much, Shawna and Nassif, Daniel, and Kelly. I hope that I get to see you in person, like when this all settles down. It'd be really nice.
Yes, absolutely. Either you
Thank
coming
you.
here,
Thank you.
Coming to see you on your new book tour. Is there anything you want to say about the new book, other than that you're writing about it?
Well, I mean, it's the draft is done and it's with my editor now. It's a different book, right? I think it's more like I wrote it when I was older, right? And it deals with more kind of adult themes in a way, but still just about people trying to find their place in the world. So we'll know. My editor might tell me to throw it in the trash, so I can't say too much about it.
Well, just send us a word, and your new healthy fan base will resist.
Yeah. The Milwaukee love is great. I really love it.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But go White Sox.
Yes, go Sox.
Go and catch that game.
Thank you to everybody so much for joining us tonight. Shawna, thank you for being such an amazing co-host, and just an amazing human being in general. So I am so happy to have done this with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh.
Yeah, well, have a good night, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. This was, I don't know, the favorite event I think I've done. Right?
Yes.
It was really nice.
Yes.
I hope we can do it again.
You too. All right.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks
Bye,
again to
thank
Kelly.
you.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thanks,
Daniel.
Congratulations.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and well wishes too.